Um, an attempt at a quick review of the history of the West with the idea of checking what's still active in it. There seemed to be no orientation other than to do something like that because once one has the consciousness, the historical consciousness, it's unavoidable because of because as soon as you attempt to do anything, you realize that you're caught in fundamental thoughts, which are you're only thinking because of the cerebral and verbal situation you're in. So, for instance, that we speak all the time about facts, and that nobody spoke about facts 300 years ago in political discussion. Facts as against values, and that this came in to the universities, especially in the wake of 1848, in Schleiermacher's transformations, or how should that be called? Attempt to set things right in the light of the critical philosophy which took over. Basically, the idea that fact is a sort of demotic, or demotic, or common sense. I just heard Elon Musk use the word common sense, which is a word I'm increasingly despise because it's being used in order to say, we're right, isn't that great, let's not think. Whereas I still believe in the nil quod est contra rationem est licitum, or the nothing that is contrary or against reason is licit or lawful. I still attempt to orient myself towards that. But let's look at some reasons why this has totally fallen out of usage and no longer exists, basically, in the light of the fact-value distinction. So we hear a lot of talk about, let's look at the facts. And the other thing beside from the fact is supposed to be just that people, either they have some kind of entrenched family values, or which are not susceptible to rational guidance, or what's better, rational persuasion, or they have some kind of so-called ideological guidance. The word ideology indicates rationalization. If somebody has ideological guidance, they're rationalizing. Because the assumption is there's something like facts, and the way to operate with human beings is to change the facts, which correspond in current usage to the institutional structures, and then people will act accordingly. So one of the hubs at the beginning of this idea is Hobbes, 17th century, and what was happening in the 17th century. So let's think about that. We're not quite. It was the beginning of the time. So I'm just if somebody would object and say you're just talking at random, well, I mean to be just talking at random. I'm just hoping that we strike upon something. We're Captain Cook. We're out in Captain Cook went 1,000 miles out in the ocean, and then he hit on land. Sometimes that happens. We suppose that there's something out there. Hopefully the gods are propitiously aligned to this sea voyage. Let's bring in the silvery tears of the moon for one moment, okay? Because they have at least one note. Since we're out at sea, and there's a moon, and the moon is somehow signals the philosophic light of nous in the Aristotelian sense of the suke. Let's say the suke is like night, where the light comes from the moon, rather than the day where the sun is blinding us. And then we have Nietzsche's chapter, which, I have here in my notes something on this, von der unbefleckten Erkenntnis, which is from the also Sprech Zarathustra, and it's usually translated, so here's the interesting thing, it's usually translated on the assumption that what he's saying is, here's this moon that's pregnant, and he wants to draw attention to the idea of immaculate conception that in connection to his overall criticism of Christianity, and in connection to wanting to give birth to the dancing star and the new ultimate, how would Nietzsche talk about this way, the self-overcoming of nihilism, I suppose. I mean, I would give reference to the account given by Wilhelm Weisschädel in his Platon and Nietzsche and the Unzeitgemasse, I think it's called Unzeitgemasse discussion of the contemporary discussion of the uncontemporaries. To say that when Nietzsche speaks of nihilism, what he's speaking of is this attempt to overcome the historical consciousness, which gets us in this situation where we've got so many directions to look at, and we don't know we can't orient ourselves, so everything seems at random. So if I were to translate that just, directly, sort of like, without thinking that much about the context, I might say, I would probably say, Flecken is like, Fleck is spot, so it's like the spotless or the pure Erkenntnis, where Erkenntnis is the philosophical word connected to cognition. Or remember, Descartes had one side which is about the thinking substance or cognition or Erkenntnis, and then he had another side which was about the reinen Vernuft, about reason, about the pure reason. The Vernuft has more to do with language and discussion, with the no law. Remembering law is nomoi for Plato, and nomoi covers everything that's customary, but basically everything that can be done with words rather than everything that has to be done with physis. Physis is then, for Descartes, covered by the cognition and the Erkenntnis. So in one sense, I'm tempted to say, then looking at the context and not just the words, that we could say this is the chapter of the Zarathustra on the pure cognition. So pure cognition rather than pure reason. So it's a critique of it's a mini critique of pure cognition. That's one way to look at it. The other way, I would affirm also, though, that the regular translation does have a sense to it, but it's just not the only way we could think about it. And Nietzsche probably thought wanted it to be incubating. He wanted to incubate something there. So what does this chapter bestow upon us, as it were? It mentions the moon, and this idea of the moon eyes, and it's in connection to what made me think about it. It's in connection to the 18th century Englishman who wrote these books on aesthetics that Nietzsche read, excuse me. But Nietzsche wrote sort of responses to them in many ways. And, the idea of the landscape being a new thing and all that, things that are sort of interesting and chic, critical theory type stuff. So we have this idea that the immaculate cognition has to do with, one, Aristotle and nous, and the what's nous? It's the eyes of the soul. What's the eyes of the soul do? They see the essence of things. What's the essence of things? It means they see there's the tree, but it also means they see there's a legal principle. Is there such a thing as the positive law, meaning a law posited or laid down? Or is there such a thing as the law of reason, meaning the law as it is according to speech like this, and then asking whether the speech, once we've understood what it claims, is makes sense or is true. It's something like the way we would ask when the flat earthers make their argument. We can understand their arguments, but then we say it doesn't really make sense. Flat earthers are a good example of a political community. Nobody thinks their arguments make sense, and they themselves don't believe their arguments, but somehow this is serving a purpose. Maybe that's something like what Agamben is saying about the law. The law doesn't really exist, but people keep talking about it, and there's a lot of books called law books, but it doesn't really exist. Somehow it hangs together, though, just like these flat earthers are kind of a powerful little contingent in their own right. And a few of their arguments are just like make enough sense that people are kind of like, I can't really prove that offhand. And then they'll start telling you, well, you really have to fly around the Arctic or something, or the South Pole, otherwise how could you possibly say something like this? You have to take a flight from Antarctica to South America, and then maybe you would be competent to speak on the flat Earth thesis. And you know how these things go, but they have a community around them. So I mean, I think this is what Nietzsche is saying is, he's saying the way we look at it, we philosophers, is not that we look at it by saying, well, yeah, of course there's a lot of stupid people doing stupid things, and stupidity is really powerful. But we philosophers fortunately, we have access to arithmetic, to geometry, to this kills me. I should know this. And the inventor of Al-Khwarizmi, the Persian. The name is due to the political situation, but he's a Persian who spoke Farsi, I'm assured, by a Iranian gentleman who frequents the Cafe Strada. But anyway, the reason I thought about that is this wonderful jump from ancient arithmetic and geometry to the sort of proto-algebra, which was basically, we could call, I think it's beautiful actually to call it this way, is solving for unknowns. I mean, that's what algebra is, right? It's solving for x, solving for unknowns. And this explodes into a field of a mental field. But this is the point I'm trying to make about reason in general. Plato put this type of reasoning, mathematicos, which is also could be translated as knowledge, and not necessarily the way we understand math as just those denominated fields and the rest that came after. But as episteme, Plato understood that as episteme in the divided line, and he put nous up higher. But episteme and nous are both part of the higher part of the divided line, and it's sort of like, I would say these are both in what I'm calling the night under the moonlight, and they're both part of the, in Aristotelian terms, they're both things seen by the eyes of the soul. We see the mathematical patterns, we see the solving for unknowns, we see the geometrical solids, we see the problem of the squaring the circle, we see all these things with the eyes of the soul, and that's in that way of speaking. We see them in the nightlight, we see them in the moonlight. So then here's the point. What Nietzsche's saying about this moonlight, about this moon that's giving birth, is that this type of knowledge, or erkentnis, or knowledge of our cognition within the being, about the essence of things, about the genus of things, about what kind of things are. This is not the pure aesthetic glance of an uninterested observer. So that's, I mean, of course, this point is very, this is like it's like a truism, it's like a boring stereotype point that we all know about. But when Nietzsche was propounding the Zarathustra, and when Hitler carried it in his rucksack in World War I, this was all not new. And it was part of the transformation. So let's think about the transformation of, so in other words, Nietzsche is saying in this chapter, these moon eyes are also eyes with a certain kind of lust in them, and so on. Einstein wants to solve a certain type of problem. He gets into it, and he says, Newton is no good for that. I've got to develop a new type of mathematics. And then he does. And then we're stuck with that. And other things of the like matter. Somebody who's a great master, a master painter, that's very obvious. In architects, we could see it's the same thing. So the same thing that happens with architecture, when the first you get somebody like Gaudi or whatever, and then but Gaudi isn't really Art Nouveau, is his own thing. And then you ask, like, who's the first really modern architect? And then a guy who really knew, who went to the École Normale Superior, told me, of course you have to start with I forget who he said. I want to say Le Corbusier, but is that the right answer? I may have forgotten the right answer. But in any case, he had the exact, he had the answer, and it's, I guess what struck me about it is it totally sounded like, to me, to my ear, I think, this sounds absolutely right. This must be correct. This is from the source. And so it's like if a Frenchman tells you this is the pronunciation, you're like, okay, he's French, he knows. There's something like that about the categorizing of all these type of subject matter which are supposed to belong to the realm of reason, or to the higher parts of the divided line. We seem to have to acknowledge this. Somebody says, this is the first of this species. This is the first of the modern architects. And this is when the modern architecture began, and these are the species of it, and this is when the postmodern had to come in. And these are the reasons for it. But it's the same. But one would want to say, Oh, but that's all right for architecture is a concrete subject in some way, but it's a little bit more like literature or something. That's all right for genres in literature, genres in architecture, but not for the hard sciences. But no, there's some guy wanted to solve some problem, so he had to build an instrumentum, and the instrumentum is based on uh, the problems he wants to solve. So, for instance, like Hilbert, for instance, the modern theorizers of the algorithm. The point of theorizing the algorithm for guys like Hilbert and Turing is they wanted something that could be presented as a calculative sequence which engineers could take and, as it were, turn into a machine. So the algorithm became a machine, and deliberately, because they're trying to solve certain problems, even though algorithm had a history in mathematics before that and had some other meanings, but they're trying to solve specific problems. So they say, here's how we're going to understand and define algorithm, and this is going to be good for the development of cybernetics and computing devices. Likewise, this is the type of problem I want to solve, Einstein says, with respect to having learned about the certain properties of the electrons, and so now I want to look at it this way. And so he produces new tools, new toolbox. It's like this in every field, and ultimately we could say if you think about all the arithmetical functions are all about addition and subtraction, because multiplication and division are really if you divide, you take a whole bunch of stuff and say take this part away. If it's division, dividing by half, you say take half of this whole bunch away. So it's really just a form of subtraction as is multiplication. And take this bunch and this bunch and this bunch and put them all together, multiplication. But even this simple thing, it relies on the fact of a sort of airy thinking, which says a bunch of clouds is the same as a bunch of eggs, or something like whatever. In other words, it levels the distinction between all things and says there's a mathematical unit and it's the same as anything, and then at the same time it doesn't actually correspond to anything. In this way, one could say arithmetic doesn't really exist, I think, in the same breath that one could say law doesn't really exist, or reason doesn't really exist. It exists as a sort of a game, but it doesn't actually correspond to the cosmos or the universe. Then, in another way, it exists as a tool that's helpful for counting eggs or counting other things, but there's something abstract about it. In the same way, law of gravity or something like that. You say there's the law of gravity, but then I ask you, what predictions have you actually made with it, and how? And is it really because it's the law of gravity, or is it just because empirically you kept tweaking until you got something that worked, and then you said it's due to the law of gravity or whatever? There's a lot of branches of learning where there's a kind of unclarity, which is sort of, since it's good enough and since it seems common sense enough, allows itself to be passed off as eternal truth, where it's really more like a ad hoc solution that happens to work, and then you say it's working because of these bigger things like the truth of mathematics or the truth of some general law of gravity or something. But let's get back to the Moonites issue. People have some way that they want to understand whatever it is they're dealing with. and then the claim is this must go all the way to the to our highest schemes, to the thinking of the church and so on. So I mean, Dugan tries to say, oh look, there's the traditional philosophical belief in essences and so on, and this is unchallenged. And then at the same time, he says, there's many Dasein, and they correspond to this pneumachia, and they correspond to the many cultures, and we recognize the existence of the other cultures. And it's a little bit like the Dasein can talk to the Daseins, but there is no one Dasein. The human being. So it's as though, in a way, he has a universalism in the sense that the British, when they went to India, what they said is, what we have to do is treat all the different tribes. You go up to northern India and the Kak, you go up to the most remote regions of the most wild tribes, and you say, yes, their propensities and their customs and their attitudes towards everything are different, but the humanity, the human in the humanity is what we have to assume is here. So in this way, Dugan acts kind of like the British under the Raj, who said the human in the humanity is here, but he says more like there's a discussion between Russians and English speakers and people of all kinds, so that the Dasein in the Dasein is here. The different Daseins are talking, so there must be something in common there. Let me take that as a jump off for sort of an optimistic take from the point of view of the thinking of the French Revolution as according to de Tocqueville. So de Tocqueville said in his book on the French Revolution that the way revolutions happen is when things get better, because as soon as something gets better, so for instance, the most agreed upon thing getting better is economics, right? I guess as soon as the cyclone of economic crashes stops and there's a brief upsurge, then people get all enthused. So de Tocqueville said right before the French Revolution, there's like people were doing better and things were easing up, and I think also because a lot of rights were granted to peasants and so on. So the sans-culottes and all that stuff is probably partially because people got like uppish or whatever. It's like, oh, why? And I guess the basic psychological mechanism, according to de Tocqueville, is that if things get better, then you say to yourself, well, why were they preventing it from getting better? Why were they fucking preventing it from getting better all this time? Why didn't they do this 20 years ago or whatever? Why were they stopping this? Since because now you see that it's possible because you're living it, and then you say, why the hell were they not doing this 20 years ago? People get angry, and then you have a revolution. That's de Tocqueville's mechanism. So let me see. It's difficult in a world discussion to apply that logic, because de Tocqueville assumes sort of, there's one they, both as the ones that were doing it and as the recipients, and that there's these sort of agents of the revolution. But we have the words like leftist, rightist, and things like that to cover those kind of big agglomerates. So let's look at it this way from the point of view of the left wing, from what they're being accused from with regard to woke. I would say let's just make a direct analogy on that, what de Tocqueville said about the French Revolution. Here's what their victory then consisted of. It would be about 2014, you get gay marriage in England, in the UK, and then at a delay, I think, in I mean, I guess not everywhere in the UK, but at a delay in Northern Ireland, I think. But in 2015, you get the Obergefell Supreme Court case in America. So this is So that's like the beginning of woke, probably. That's probably the spur of it. There's a victory. People get enthused about it, and then we're like, oh, we're marching forward in progress, and the thought is, yeah, there will be no end to it. I think, by the way, just let's look at the. I don't believe in the realpolitik or that kind of thing, because I think that's. It's as though you were saying. It's as though that thing about the what you knock out with all your efforts, what you rake away with all your efforts, Mother Nature will bring back to bear, or something like that. I don't believe that's obviously fanciful, I think, because wild beasts aren't going to. There's not going to be. I mean, wild beasts aren't going to take back the world. It's not going to be like the Middle Ages again, where wild beasts are menacing. There's wolves out all menacing. I mean, here and there are, of course, but it's like, by and large, we're not menaced by wild beasts the way we were even 100 years ago. They've been pretty much quelled. There's big things that change, and the general thesis that there's no such thing in nature in that kind of sense, I think, makes a lot of sense. It's kind of obvious. There wasn't cybernetics, there wasn't huge technological warfare, there wasn't drone warfare until there was, and it's only recent. And there's some big things change, and it's not even desirable to try to say that there was nature as appointed. These are the limits to which nature has appointed, and this is the way things are. So that's, I mean, I guess from the point of view of Nietzsche and myself, I would say the people that say that's not true and there's an eternal nature, I would say that's a nice slogan, and it may be very powerful, and stupid people may agglomerate about it, and they may not be stupid in the sense that they reason to themselves, well, what's the good of reason or truth when I can have something that's powerful and will get me what I want? Is that stupid? Not exactly. It's not, obviously. But it's stupid from the point of view of, does it make sense? Is it reasonable? It's stupid from that point of view. Maybe reason is something, I mean, obviously reason is something a lot of people would be happily do away with. Because it's not necessarily directly the most powerful thing. It's not powerful with, most people are unable to reason, so of course it's not very powerful. You can't talk to people, and most people, through anything that requires a kind of technique, even if it's you have to know something about Aristotle's syllogistic analytics or something. You could only talk to people that have studied it, understood it, comprehended, are able to readily deal in those terms. You couldn't talk to everyone that way, and it's the same with a lot of ideas, right? If you have some kind of technique, then you can't talk to everyone that way. You can only talk to everyone in the way that has the most immediately powerful political bang. You can talk to people about the danger of losing democracy. You can talk to people about common sense. You can talk to people about various notions that are topical today. Let me make a reflection on the other side of that, from the right-wing side. So on the right-wing side, why is LGBTQ plus bad? So I think one reason that is not mentioned is that, one, there's a lot of homosexuals in MAGA and on the Trump side, but the reason they're against LGBTQ LGBTQ plus is because they want it to be like it was in the 50s, where basically the idea is a guy could be homosexual like Rock Hudson or somebody, but he would still be a man's man because he'd live a double life. They like that version. They like the double life version. That's what they're comfortable with. That's what they want. But then the left keeps pushing this notion that, oh, wasn't it terrible that Rock Hudson was a gay man and he couldn't reveal who he was? But so, I mean, to them, I think what's so disgusting, like this, the paleoconservative types, I think, one thing they don't like is LGBTQ plus is sort of like a specific type of gay. It's like the kindness, aggressive kindness or something, or like nicety or something. There's too much of a specific culture that they don't like in that. So it's not really so from a lot of them, it's not necessarily that they're against gay. They're against that specific type of there's no name for it. I don't know that, you know, how there's a sort of niceness culture or something around LGBTQ plus, and it's sort of very soft way of dealing with people, which is congenial to some people, but there's to other people that they just don't like that type of culture, and it has nothing to do with it doesn't have to do essentially to do with homosexuality or heterosexuality. It has to do with the style of expressing it, and whether it's done in a 50s style way or some other way, or in the way, I mean, a guy told me, like, in the Hells Angels, if you're supposed to be, officially you're supposed to be like a white heterosexual guy, but you could lie, and nobody would really say anything. Like, so if you're Hispanic or whatever, you just lie, and then that's fine. But they wanted you to lie. So that's the kind of culture they liked. So I think that's something that's underplayed in American politics, is that there's simply a question of people having a different preference for the type of what they find congenial to themselves. It's not necessarily about the issues that it seems to be about if you listen to the arguments as they appear in the mainstream political discussions. The other issue, though, obviously immigration is the big issue, and I'll just make a comment on how it appears from California. I think so. The problem is that in California California and Texas are in a way different situation than everywhere else, I think, because one, you have sort of Spanish on the Pacific coast for like since Cortez or something like that, like 500 years, and 250 years or something in California. And so the idea that you send ICE into California to collect up Spanish-speaking people makes no sense, because it's been Spanish-speaking for 250 years. And the attitude of Californians about the people that MAGA is presenting as the ones who are rigging the vote or whatever, the 20 million immigrants who the Democrats are putting on, Nancy Pelosi is putting on the vote, and all these other things. This type of idea, it just doesn't really make any sense outside the flat earth thing, outside the fact that we don't like this, and we're not going to reason with you anymore, and we're all together on not liking it, so fuck you. That's what it's kind of like. And some of these guys are actually Hispanic guys, or just like act like they're white to be in with the MAGA. But it doesn't. Again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's just like the force of it at that level. All I'm saying is the force of it at that level is something you can't. There's nothing that can contend with it. This man finds it congenial to live this way, and that's how he wants to live, and that's what he's going to fight for. It's not a. So it's obvious that. And Nietzsche knew this. All philosophers have known this. It's obvious there's these forces of stupidity, if you want to call it that. Is it actually? I mean, it's not necessarily stupid to want to live in a way that's comfortable and congenial to you, but these forces that derange discussion from the point of view of those few among us who want to bring as much moon-eyed discussion to it, as much discussion free from sort of these group interests or group demands which have nothing to do with persuasion, but it's just this is the way we want it. I mean, all you could say in terms of persuasion is, yeah, we're a group of people. Don't we have a right to live in a way that's comfortable to us, or whatever? I mean, that's the same thing in a way, I suppose. I think in England, in the sense that people argue, you get a lot of immigrants, and then people are like, it's happening too fast, and we're not really comfortable with having people living in a different style than we're living, or something like that. I think that does play a role too in global immigration discussions, and in the Elon Musk discussion, which is of course informed by the South African situation. The Boers, again, this is another situation where it's like, it appears from the point of view of the standard Democrat that, here's this racist asshole that they came in and colonized, and then they want to tell everybody what to do, and here's and also in addition he's lying about black people killing some whites or something in South Africa, some Afrikaners. But then when you look at it, it's like, wait, they were there for like 400 years or something, and they have a culture that's developed. And actually, for most of the time, it was like, so far as I can see, they're probably the people that lived there, the tribes that were there, just said, leave us. Mostly it was like, leave us alone, and we prefer to do our own thing. And the Afrikaners were like, okay. And it was only in relatively recent times, like in the 60s and stuff, when people kept saying, oh no, there has to be democratic participation by the tribal groups, and then everybody gets confused, there's intergenerational problems. There's a question comes in, is it all right to allow some tribes not to be part of the globalization, to be part of the internet and be part of globalization? I mean, even before the internet, but to be part of the global discussion on spreading civilization, on the human and humanity being shared by everyone on the earth. You're a human, you're part of humanity, you must know about humanity, therefore you can't remain in your tribal way of life. I think that's, in America, the most devastating form of that is with Native Americans. But that was all. I think that also happened in South Africa, where I suppose what I'd say is the mainstream, the strongest force on the earth, in a way, it's true, is the standard Democrats, the mainstream Democrats. You got a lot of leftists that you get all the academics are progressives, and then you get a few sort of radicals and stuff, and the academics the progressives have some say, but most of them don't have very much say at all. It's all just the center, and the center is the center is Trump and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton hung out together, so they're not really that much different. And so taken that way, the view of the center is something like what I just said. It's just like it's a one-sided view of those situations, which basically is from the side of view of saying, the white man's burden and the Heart of Darkness version and the Mr. Kurtzy's Dead version and all that stuff, the anti-colonialism and the Edward Said and the but in the simple sense, more like, didn't they go there with the sword and then start talking about a lot of nonsense about spreading justice when they came with the sword, but without looking at the whole thing. I think that's true also with this whole, you see that again and again. You see, and you could, I guess you have to look for historians that are more even-handed, like Richard Bullitt, for instance, a historian from Columbia, University of Columbia, has made a lot of remarks along these lines of like, there was a switch where up to a certain point all history books said this, and then then all history books started taking this tack, and things like that, where we're stuck with history books with the limited political expression behind them. I mean, in the worst case, like worst in the sense of like most narrow outlook. You get something like Howard Zinn and People's History or something like that, which it's obviously it's just that it's obviously a political tack, right? It's obvious this is what we want to say. We want to say the Columbus was genocidal, and we want to say here's all the lists of wicked things, and we don't want to focus on. We want to focus on the negatives and not on the positives in a certain sense. So in these type of senses, I can see there's a lot of issues that in the tranquility of the study or the the comfortable chair, you could come up with the very sophisticated cases, which are nonetheless, of course, one-sided due to the selection of material, as we know, and has been really highlighted since the 19th century. I read something once about that's particularly of interest with Lord Acton, because Lord Acton was in this strange situation of being like having a German mother and all these things, being a Catholic with a German mother and Protestant Prussia and things like that, and situations he found himself in that got him to thinking about what are these Prussian historians that are devoting themselves to the House of Hohenzollern and overtly swearing allegiance. What are they doing to history? What is history? So you see that's happening at a very sophisticated level, and then you ask, is there a way to straddle that and keep this thing going? I think that's one of the overall themes of Nietzsche. But okay, just one last word. What is the positivism? I mean, what is the optimism of de Tocqueville's thesis then, from the point of view of the current notion? I guess it would be when I would impose that at a higher level. So this thesis that when things get better, like economically, that stirs people up, and then there's a revolution or something, could be applied to the increase that many people have considered unpleasant in the power of LGBTQ plus culture. Some people have, for me, I can't say that straightforwardly, because I think in one sense Christian Stewart is the highest expression of that LGBTQ plus culture, and I love Kristen Stewart, so how could I say that? And I think in a way she's sort of an expression of the Atlanticist primacist spirit in a certain sense, and that's something very beautiful, I think, in a way. So in a way, I would say I would contrast it. Dugin says the Russian civilization. I say, well, but there's also this Atlanticist primacist civilization, and it's noble in its own way because it wants to be the world culture, and that's something great. Even if you don't like the culture, the very fact of the catching the whole world, and being a greedy fisherman, so greedy that you catch the whole world and the whole constellation of the stars. There's something magnificent in that. I can't deny a certain attraction to that. However you want to dislike the mores or the customs that crop up with it. Maybe they're not the best ones, maybe they'll change, but the project of bringing everything under one structure, under one tremendous music, as it were. That's the thing that Wagner was... let me go into my old spiel one time, because Wagner is, by the Financial Times and by the Hans Ulrich Oberst types, misused in the sense of his so-called total work of art. They call Gesamtausgabe? I think so. No, sorry, that doesn't make sense. What is the total work of art called? I can't think of the name for it, but in any case, this term has been taken to mean something like something like the Chinese opera, or something where there's many different jugglings going on, many different art forms are coming in. But what it's actually meant in Wagner is attempt to recreate something like the music of Palestrina, or the music from the core of the Catholic time, that everybody could be under the one structure of that music. But Nietzsche observes that he failed to achieve this grand style. He made something people enjoy, but it's not something like Christianity, where everyone has to be under that certain ideas, and that it catches that its fire engulfs the earth in a certain sense. It's more like it has certain people are aficionados, certain people are into it, but it doesn't really engulf people as a there's a Bayreuth festival, there's things, but it's not at the same level as Christianity. That's what Wagner was trying to achieve. Gesamtkunstwerk? Maybe it's Gesamtkunstwerk, I don't know. But anyway, it's always translated to total work of art. But okay, I think this kind of claims our attention a little bit, as when we see this notion that there's a project of such a scope that it could claim the whole earth. So I think there is that attraction in the Atlanticist project. That's Dugin's total enemy. But I don't see why it has to be the total enemy. I don't know why. I think there could be some kind of there could be some kind of organization within, some kind of feudatories within global dominion or whatever, monarchia or whatever. But what does it have to do with the these two sort of pushing questions of the for or against the rapidity of immigration, which in fact doesn't really matter that much in America. I think it has more to do with, in America, I think the immigration has been really slowed down for a long time, except when businesses want sort of cheap tech labor, in the sense that once they get somebody over here, no matter how skilled they are, they're not in their country of origin, and they can be kind of mistreated by the companies, I think, and lower paid than they would be if they were felt their footing more safely as native Americans, I guess. And then the other issue being the question of the too much enthusiasm for the revolution of the wokeness or whatever. So I guess that's the interesting thing. So how much do we get out of comparing that to the back and forth of the tides of the French Revolution with respect to, we start with Robespierre, and then we have this lower noblemen or whatever from Corsica come in, and there's kind of a reactionary turn, but at the same time there's a forward turn because the Code Napoleon is considered so progressive, and then later on you get another knockback in the reactionary, or by this time called the conservative direction by the how is that thing called, the Council of Europe or whatever? How did they call it? My memory is slipping away, but when these people met up after Napoleon in order to decide how to settle things in the post Napoleonic era, you had another sort of restoration of the old order, but it wasn't sufficient to withstand the forces of commercialism and the social revolution which had happened. And through all this, well, let me say one last thing, just because I'm thinking about it now. It's sort of overlapping. These waves are overlapping. Like, we started with Hobbes a little bit. What's happening in Hobbes' time? The so-called noblemen are becoming gentlemen in a way, or maybe they're already called gentlemen, but the gentleman is becoming more like a I almost want to say a fop, because gentlemen are starting to go in the direction of fops, and they're becoming no longer the courtiers primarily. They're becoming no longer they're more and more, less and less becoming the people at court who are arguing aggressively for their points, and more the businessmen and the military men are coming in and playing that role. The gentlemen are becoming, how should that be said? Gallants. They're becoming more like gallants or something. Good company. Men who know about who the mistress of the king is, and the latest Louis is in Paris, and how she does her hair or something like that. Gallants, not gentlemen in the older sense. Different type of being, which then becomes viewed more and more with as superfluous individuals, I think, at a certain point, no longer to be supported by custom and by the culture. But the point is, there were some customs and cultures and ways of doing things that have gone out of existence, and likewise we're seeing sort of a rise of little customs and cultures that some people don't like, and then some of them will remain, some of them won't. It's not a question. It's not a question of exterminating the gentlemen or exterminating the gallants, but it's a question of the social that people raise their kids to be like that. Just as Bannon is raising these issues, like will people have to raise their kids to have Neuralink or something like that in order to compete in school?